my name is Derek Harp, and I am one of the founders and the chairman of NexDefense. I started in cybersecurity. I started my first company actually in 1997 when I was exiting the U.S. Navy. It was traditional cybersecurity, but along the way I got exposed to a emerging area, a greenfield area of cybersecurity as it pertains to control systems. Now these may be SCADA systems, so whether those be ICS systems or SCADA systems or IoT systems, building control systems, these are all really unique systems. And this is I don't know if you're familiar with the term operating technology, but we call these OT systems instead of IT systems. Now there is fundamentally, there are some similarities with networking equipment and communication protocols, but they get very divergent very quickly. Refresh rate is decades. You have industrial protocols like Modbus and DMP3, actually hundreds of industrial protocols. You have totally different people running them. You have mechanical and electrical engineers. You have a different reporting chain in the companies. They typically securing these systems does not come up through the CISO. And there's tangible assets in these networks. These are computer networks that control pumps, valves, actuators, turbines, real physical elements that present an entirely different situation. So these systems are engineered. They're designed by engineers. They're made to run in specific ways. They were typically built with no security in mind. Safety and reliability are the community watchwords. They were probably at one point not connected to the outside world. There's certainly copper wires were connecting things at one point. Now that's just not the case. And so they're in a situation where they have to add security to something that really was never intended to be added. And these are everywhere. You start thinking about control applications. It's in every critical infrastructure and most of the services that we all rely on every day. Incidents are on the rise. This is something anybody who's been in the space knows that there have been all sorts of non-sexy things like intellectual property theft going on in these spaces, AutoCAD drawings being siphoned out by various third parties. But we are entering an age now where you're starting to see more what we would call cyber to physical events, where it starts with ones and zeros, but in the end, physical destruction or physical alteration in the real world. And most recently, the ones I guess that I would just call attention to, it was interesting that German steel mill at the end of late 2014. This is interesting in that the German government, BSI, did disclose some information, more redacted than we'd like, but you could see where a traditional spearphishing campaign into the IT network of the business was able to pivot and show expertise within the control system and ultimately result in the explosion of a blast furnace and some pretty good physical destruction. And then most recently, on December 23rd, the Ukrainian power grid attack. How many people are familiar with that? I'm just curious how much, if you're not watching the sector, how much people know about this. So 3 different geographic regions in the Ukraine were brought down simultaneously, rendering no power for about 250 customers. It was very sophisticated, very coordinated. It didn't use necessarily sophisticated technologies, but the attack was very sophisticated. And the direct evidence is months worth of planning. It's not enough to just know how a Siemens or Rockwell or GE system works. You have to know how it works in that specific instance if you want to have a particular outcome in your attack. And so these threat actors were able to operate inside these networks and plan and set up before their execution, final execution with no detection whatsoever. So to address the cybersecurity concerns for control systems, we assembled a team steeped in 2 areas. Certainly cybersecurity. There's a lot of lessons learned over the last few decades that can be applied here, but also counterbalanced with deep knowledge of the industrial control system. You need to have products to really address this space and to give comfort to the people who run these operating units. You need to have a team that definitely speaks and understands the language of the people that run the control network. So my background has been startups for 20 years or 19 years, I guess, starting with Logicube, which is now Cisco Systems and Teleshield. And then since then, I've spent probably a good majority of it in cybersecurity, but not all of it. I am also the chairman of the GICSP, which is really the only standard, the only certification, the Global Industrial Cybersecurity Professional. We have about approaching about 1,000 people that hold the certification, and some global gas and oil and electric companies are now essentially mandating it for both their own people and external third parties that want to come on their premises. My other co-founder is Mike Asante, which I co-founded that first company with years ago. He went on to become the CISO of American Electric Power, and that's where our exposure to this kind of area began. And they became NERC CISO. If you know what NERC is the body that can fine utilities for cybersecurity violations. It is the only vertical under that sort of regulatory pressure. And then our nominal co-founder, but a very involved investor and director, is Tom Noonan, the CEO, co-founder of Internet Security Systems. We actually located the company in Atlanta this time and moved a variety of folks there, like myself. I moved there, and we're hiring former Internet Security Systems folks to essentially staff this particular team out, people that Tom felt had learned some analogous lessons in the ISS days, being a pioneer in industrial or in intrusion detection. We're kind of using some go-to-market strategies that they used. But we've also added people like Doug Wiley, who was essentially at Rockwell for 20 years, was exited there to join us. He was their chief security spokesman for the company. The product is also one we did not build from scratch. We acquired a technology out of the Idaho National Laboratory. It was a DOE-sponsored research project called SOFIA. We've kept that name. It was the DOE's impetus for reaching out and having the lab do this research was the desire to have at least utility operators have visibility into their networks, have an idea of what was going on, what was communicating with what. We'll go into some of our features of our product. We spent some time acquiring it, learning what they had learned, working with some of the beta customers they had been using. In 2014, we started doing our own beta testing and building a company and capitalization around SOFIA. 2015, we launched our first major commercial release of the product late last year, and we're about to launch our second major release here in the next few weeks. We've got a growing category of customers, but also of channel partners and consultancies that are using it in a variety of ways. KPMG, the ICS CERT, ABB, we're working with equipment manufacturers increasingly as well. We'll talk about what verticals we're applying it into last. This is the gist of it. I stayed pretty high level for today. We could get into a lot of detail. It is built specifically for OT environments. It understands industrial protocols, doing deep packet inspection on the specifics. It understands the instruction packages between it. It's not enough to approve that certain elements are talking to each other, but are they talking to each other in a way that is acceptable? It understands plant evolution. IT networks don't even have to think this way, but plants, if we talk about just the evolution of a plant, there's cycles of being up or being down, coming up, being in maintenance, and there's a whole bunch of different behaviors and exposures involved with understanding that. So we are focused on giving these owners their first time ever, visibility into where are all my assets. They actually don't know where all the network connected assets are. How are they communicating? The ability to give them a baseline so they can compare any kind of new behaviors against what is acceptable or normal, and that can be even pertaining to particular phases, and give them really the first visibility into the communications of their industrial network. And we have some additional products in the works that will complement this as time goes on. So we're focused today a lot on power, oil, gas, and defense. Now there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously power is facing regulatory fines for compliance, and NERC version 5, which soon will be focused on version 6, calls for monitoring of their network. So these sorts of things are coming out. The NIST cybersecurity framework for critical infrastructure also now is saying you got to monitor things. You got to know where your assets are. You got to know how they're behaving. It sounds like common sense, but it really has never been applied to this particular space. We are also, though, cognizant of and having people call us, even though most of our activities in these top 3 verticals, we've got activity going on in a ton of other places. People really, I challenge people oftentimes to think of how many control systems you think you interface with from the moment you get up in the morning to when you go to bed, and it's a lot of systems. It's building access systems, heating and air conditioning systems, the lights on the way to work, elevator control systems, wastewater, water treatment, electric. It goes on and on and on, and our reliance on these systems is significant. So we've got a lot of work to do, we and other companies in this space trying to address different aspects of it. But there's a fairly amazing future for companies focused in this particular area of cybersecurity. So be glad to field any questions afterwards, and in the future if you want to reach out to me. We've raised about $4.5 million so far. We're closing another 1.5 kind of mini tranche right now, and then we expect to do a Series B in the fall based on some of the sales that we expect to close here this summer. Thank you.